my dad as a balanced person. As a child, he painted for me the image of what an adult male should be. In a way, I think my dad shaped my expectations of what a man should be. He can be a professional, but he should also be able to be in touch with his family. So I saw that modeled to me right from childhood, dad cooking for us, dad being the one, doing the shopping, dad running the bath, dad teaching us lessons of how to organize yourself the evening before. And also, once we have now sat down and we've eaten, we all watched news together. We watched news about what was happening in other countries. And I have to mention this one. I remember that the TV was bigger than me. And I saw Uncle Julius on TV. And I asked Dad, why isn't that's Uncle Julius? Yeah, you told us Uncle Julius went home, yeah? And they're calling him Julius, then a very something. Then my dad said, yeah, they're calling him Mwalimu. Then I asked my dad, what's Mwalimu? I was a child of about 6, so I didn't understand Swahili. I only spoke English. And Dad said, Mwalimu means teacher. So I asked Dad, so, oh yeah, Uncle Julius went home. So he's now teaching in school? My dad said, no, Mwalimu means teacher. He's now president of his country. I asked Daddy, what's president? Luckily, my dad allowed us to ask questions. He said, president is head of a country. Like your headmistress is head of your school. So Mwalimu, president, was head of his country. So I asked, oh, is he head of Kenya? Then my dad said, no, he's president of Tanzania. So they call him Mwalimu because he's brought many new things he's teaching them. And I told my dad, oh, that's interesting. And from Dad, I got to know Tanzania was next to Kenya. And for me as a child, that was very important to see that. Because people who are ordinarily on campus, people who were just, in Makerere, were now world changers. And I remembered some of the discussions that they had had talking about their country. So as a child, I grew up knowing that presidents are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And some of the discussions they used to have around the table about, oh, so this Sunday we'll talk about this, your country, and what do you have in your country? Oh, in my country we only have copper. Oh, really? But that's important for all electrical equipment. Really? Oh, but how will we get it out to the coast? And we are landlocked. And then the other colleague would say that, oh, but you can pass it through my country. And that led to Zambia becoming a world leader in copper and, setting up industries. And the next weekend, Dad and his mates would talk about the next country. So they took turns talking about his country. What do you have? Oh, we don't have much. Our country is just full of sisal plants. What can anyone do with that? And then then they exchanged ideas, brainstorming. At that time, I didn't know it was brainstorming. They would just be talking over a cup of tea. And one of them usually liked his bottle, so he would be having his bottle. And they talked, oh, but sisal can be used for making bags because, we export coffee, we export sugar, it has to be in bag. Oh, really? So then Tanzania became the leader of sisal in the world. And so talking like that, and then Kenya coffee, I realized that these ordinary discussions led to ideas that, led to countries becoming major exporters in the world. And I thought it's important to sit and talk to others. And later I'll talk about Pan-Africanism, but I saw it happening there. I thought I didn't understand it as a movement that time as a child, but I just saw that people were just exchanging ideas and it worked, and people became, world changers and presidents. And as a child, I grew up knowing that nothing is impossible. Nothing was impossible because of the simplicity of those discussions and those beginnings and seeing where they led to. And later on, people got to know them in their public office, but I knew them as ordinary Makererians. And why that is important is because sometimes in our generation, people are looking for someone to open the door for you, and people are kind of looking to old ways of doing things, whereas now we have social media and there should be a new way of doing things. So when I talk of my father as a good cook, he cooked nice meals. But my dad was also very good at cooking ideas. He was a philosopher. He was a geomorphologist. He was a politician. And my dad helped us to realize that this world is all interconnected. A geographer has their contribution to make. A political scientist has his a part to play. A historian has his place to play. And they don't have to be of a particular color. You can be of any color. Knowledge is knowledge. It's the application that's important. So I remember my dad as a good cook because he taught me how to cook, but I also remember him as a change maker because a lot of what he did changed the course of history, the political history of Kenya, as well as the history in the field of science. And that one is very important because as I grew up, then I went to university in India. Then my dad was invited to Kenya to set up the School of Environmental Studies at Moi University in Eldoret. Many people didn't know what environment what it meant at that time. He set up a great program, a great school, and they set up with his friend Mustafa Tolba, they set up UNEP in Nairobi, and that changed the course. And the reason why I mention this is that up to today, we are still grappling with the same issues, some of which he warned about in 1969 and 70, about global warming when my dad introduced the world to the notion of global warming. And then when they set up UNEP and the School of Environmental Studies, my dad mentioned, and I remember people saying that he had gone nuts while he was in jail, but he started talking about the human beings, the animals, the plants. They live within a certain habitat, a certain ecosystem, where some things could not change and should not change so that there would be equilibrium. For example, we people from Lake Victoria, he said that the lake needs to remain fresh. The lake is a breathing ecosystem with fish, depending on the planktons in the ground, and with we should not have effluents, wastewater going into the lake, because the lake is a living organism. It will kill the fish. It will lead to eutrophication. It will lead to... And some of the challenges he talked about years ago are now challenges that are threatening the livelihood of our people, the Luo. And that is very serious. I'll come to it in the end. But there should be a place for scientists. In progressive countries, they've asked the scientists to inform the politicians, to inform policy with evidence-informed policy. But you find in some communities, some of our third world countries, the scientists are doing the research, they're coming up with the findings, but there is no place for them at the discussion table. So we're forming policies out of air. They're not evidence-informed policies, so therefore they're not working. And so when I talk of my dad as a good cook for cooking food, he also cooked ideas, but my dad also served those ideas at international level, at the UN level. When at the Rio conference, he facilitated the presentation of the president's speech on chlorofluorocarbons at the conference in the Rio Summit headed by Gro Brundtland of Norway, and introducing the world to the notion that businesses should be conversant and should respect the environment. Business policies and practices should bring on board environmental considerations. That's Agenda 21. And then he taught environment at university, and in the last few years he had been teaching at community level because of the strong belief that global warming that they've been warning about all these years will hit grassroots populations hardest, the populations that whose livelihood depends on the soil and the climate. And so my dad was teaching at that level their resilience, what they can do, starting with what they have, rather than waiting for handouts, which are spread thin now. And so I find that I had the honor of learning from someone who I called father. Others call him scientist. He's been described as being impossibly intelligent. To me, he was daddy. But he also prepared us for the challenges of this generation, because our generation are going to find it hardest, because we live at a time when we are facing challenges that the world has never faced before. Challenges that nobody has an answer. No scientific experiment can give us an answer to. It's a challenge that depends on the people, and that is going to take all that we need to survive. So I was very grateful to have grown up with my daddy to teach us, and the diversity we learned, the hard work, the persistence are all very important, because the times we are going to live in now, the times we live in now are harder. Africanus.